Robot Talk is the podcast that sits down with robot enthusiasts from around the world and asks them the questions you always wanted answered. Like, can we learn to work with the robots? And how does that thing work? Hello everyone, welcome to Robot Talk. I'm your host, Claire Asher, and this week's episode is about how robotics and AI in the workplace are changing how we learn and develop new skills. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that you can send in questions for my future guests. And there are a few different ways you can do that. You can submit questions on the website at robottalk.org or on Patreon at patreon.com/Claire Asher. Or you can contact me on social media at robottalkpod. So, without further ado, let's get on with this week's interview. I recently had a fascinating conversation with Matt Beane from the University of California, Santa Barbara, about how humans can learn to work with intelligent machines. This week, I'm speaking to Matthew Beane, an assistant professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, researching robots and AI in the workplace. Hi, Matt. Wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Delightful to be here. Really appreciated the invite. And please just call me Matt. Only my mother calls me Matthew.
Sure. So you have spent years conducting field research on how people work with robots in the real world across a really wide range of different occupations. So can you tell me some of the things that you've learned about how these new technologies are changing the workplace?
Right. The main thing to say, perhaps, that might be most counterintuitive, but also seem pedantic all at once, is that the technologies aren't changing anything.
Okay.
We are. And sure. This is both a philosophical thing from the people that trained me at MIT, but empirically, I go into workplaces, as you say, and watch, say, everything from materials transport with automated guided vehicles or robots to watching people these days, knowledge workers, deal with AI, so disembodied, non-robotic technology. Not yet do we have an instance of the plan for what to do, adjustments for failures and problems in the interim, and collaborative interaction being initiated and managed by non-human entities. Mm-hmm. The story is a human picks up a new tool to do something and an effect is created in the world. And so doing field research actually really teaches you that in stark contrast, vivid detail every day. If, as I found in robotic surgery, junior surgeons aren't getting to operate anymore, it's not, the technology can make it easier or harder to involve a junior person in the work. But ultimately, it's that human's decision to pick up the tool and use it that way. The very vivid example I got of that, of robotic surgery, was surgeons complained about the initial version of the Da Vinci surgical robot, which is the one that I studied, because it only had one control console. So it was very difficult for them to sort of get up from that and give a trainee control and then have to watch on a television a meter or two away what they were doing and turn their head back and forth and so on. And so they complained, and to their credit, Intuitive Surgical produced a trainee console. So you have two consoles now that can control one robot, and they can even share control of the four arms that are inside the patient. So the junior person could take one and the senior person could take three and so on. And it's never done. Never. Surgeons don't use that capability. It's like being a driver's ed instructor. I suppose here in the States, we have these cars, I don't know if you have them, where the passenger also has brakes and certain other controls, right? Yeah. And so it requires a cultural shift. It requires a mindset shift around what my job is as this senior person in the interaction, and then some technological changes to allow that kind of interaction. And I've seen now multiple instances of this in many occupations, as you say, up sort of north of 30, very different technologies, very different contexts. And it's extremely rare that a set of features gets built in a way that nudges humans over the line to improving, enriching, or even maintaining that novice involvement in the work. You know this in your work. I know it in mine. Like, part of what is beautiful and energizing about being an expert is solving complicated problems.
Mm.
And so if you give me a new tool that will let me solve that much bigger problem independently, it's just so satisfying to handle a bigger problem than I could before with this brilliant new tool, whatever it is. 500 years ago, it was something different. But now robots and AI, it just means that expert's rarely going to turn down that deal in favor of preserving a novice's involvement in the work, who will slow things down, make more mistakes.
Yeah.
If that becomes optional, you really have to be very either lucky or intentional about designing that tech and marketing it, selling it, implementing it in a way that keeps that novice in the loop. Of course, that novice optional finding is the core thing that sort of woke me up to the stream of research I've been on for the last 12 years or so. And that's at the core of the TED Talk and now the book, the sort of the threat that's in the middle of that book.
Yeah. So perhaps we should kind of back up a bit and talk about why this relationship, this novice expert relationship is so core to how humans learn skills and have done for millennia, I guess.
Right. Well, the why it's interesting. You're the first person I've had quite a few conversations about this book, and nobody's quite asked that version of that question. I think the answer is our biology, actually, in that, we don't have 5 brains and 12 arms. Complicated work that involves, the first archaeological example I managed to dig up for the book. Sorry about that pun, unintended. But was the advent of the bow, the first stored energy weapon that humanity created. This is about 160,000 years ago. And once you look objectively at all of the things you need to be able to create to make a bow that works, arrows, fletching the arrows, making sure they're weighted properly, the arrowheads, the bow, the actual gut or the string, and so on, no one human being can contain all the knowledge and capability required to build all those components, let alone, this was the archaeological finding, fetch all the ingredients.
Yeah.
And so if human beings did have multiple brains and bodies that spanned a kilometer and, or we were giant amoeba or something with multiple brains, then sure we could. It's just that because of the way we're built, we have to rely on each other to deal with ambitious, complicated, unknown things. And the older you get, the more you learn, as long as you stay alive. And so it's healthy and natural for the collective, for the novice, the younger person, to be doing things that enable that expert to do that more valuable thing at the top of that accomplishment pyramid that serves the collective, like the bow. Tribes that got that outdid others and so on. And that's the beginning of that natural chain. I think that's the why. And we've taken it for granted ever since. You can see, there's really marvelous archaeology of apprenticeship research going. Pre-Hellenic Greece is a very common Western scientific target. So there's a lot of research in that domain. And so I think it got initialized about 160,000 years ago, and we've never given it up. We don't see chimps doing this, really. You don't see other kinds of intelligent beings, octopi. And so I think there's really not the sort of core social ingredient isn't there.
Yeah.
But anyway, it just is sort of installed in our operating system. And up and until the advent of, say, symbolic expression, writing, art, even cave paintings, the only way to transmit knowledge and expertise was this mechanism. So the vast majority of our history as a species, any innovation you could point to, but even up and until today, flows through this relationship.
Yeah. And I guess, you could just verbally explain to someone how to do something, but I think especially when you're doing more complex tasks, actually having your hands on doing it is a much more powerful way of learning than just talking about it.
Yes, and talking is a necessary component of this relationship.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to think if you could get away with that kind of skill development with no speech.
Hmm.
Certainly the printed word dramatically catapulted all of this forward. It allows people to arrive at that interaction with a lot more conceptual understanding of what's going on. Critical enabler for our society, remains critical. Procedures, rules, written down knowledge. You can learn a lot on your own. Amazing. And that just allows you now to begin participating with an expert in much more complicated games sooner in your life.
Hmm.
Brilliant. But there's still this forefront of human achievement that requires this, like, we're all doing something slightly that involves something we've never done before. The expert, however, has played comparable games, has solved comparable problems, has credibility. People trust them. And so a novice might be a novice rocket scientist is capable of so much more than a novice, stone fetcher for bow making. But they cannot build that next rocket nozzle.
Yeah. So you mentioned the book. So earlier this year, you published a book called The Skill Code: How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines. And you talk about a lot of what we've just been talking about how humans learn new skills and about how AI and robotics is kind of, in many ways, interrupting that relationship of the kind of the expert and the novice. And you talk about the 3 C's that humans need to master new skills, which is challenge, complexity, and connection. So can you talk a little bit about how those are being disrupted by the way that we're implementing AI and robotics technology?
Sure. Yes. Briefly, challenge is work close to but not at the edge of your capability. Complexity is engage with the broader universe of skills and activities that you're embedded in. Mm-hmm. And connection is building warm bonds of trust and respect between human beings. So those are the 3 C's. And it was a lovely privilege for this book to both look across my own research to find out what successful learners had insisted on, taken risks to preserve, and then look across all social science, over 13 disciplines, plus some biology like neuroscience and so on, to see the extent to which all of these disciplines were speaking with one voice about the activities, sort of atomic units of skill development that we might all agree on. And whether these are accurate or not, or exhaustive or not, society will judge. They seemed accurate and exhaustive to me. And to those that I tested the manuscript with, who I trust a lot. Some of them are on the back of the book. And I think the novice optional finding, which is the sort of the core early finding in my research that I've since seen in many places, you can just unpack that across these 3 C's. It makes them less healthy. So challenge, for instance, you can imagine a novice surgeon, investment banker, police officer, or teacher. If they are now optional in the work, they are not going to get to struggle near the edge of their capability for nearly as long. Because if they're lucky, they're getting dropped in to solve a problem optionally and at the discretion of an expert who would otherwise be making better progress using new tools. And so they're going to be very quick to say, okay, that's enough, kid. No more. I literally saw this in the operating room, and they did not say it that politely. Because the junior person's performance is visible to everyone. In that case, like literally there were televisions on the walls in the operating room, and everyone in the operating room could see in precise detail what that junior person was doing. Yeah. And the senior surgeon had to yell at them to be heard about any feedback about their activities. So anyway, challenge quickly goes away, because anytime you're experiencing challenge, by definition, you are performing less well than you could otherwise. That's how you struggle to learn. Then complexity comes typically through collateral encounters with other people in other roles trying to accomplish other things, variation in the work. So for instance, a surgeon might, after focusing on getting good at knot tying and suturing or incisions or what have you, what is that nurse doing? And how does that connect with my job? Or what allows this institution to make money? And does making money matter here in the same way that it matters in the UK or in South Africa? A very, very good surgeon who is very good at operating actually does have this web of understanding of complexity that comes with sort of semi-wasteful nosing around the territory and curiosity as they learn and grow.
Yeah.
If the expert gets this new tool, they become much more efficient and lose this complexity of it because they are much more focused, hyper-focused. And the junior person, of course, loses this entirely because they don't get to participate. In some cases, this is less stark. And then the human connection bit, in a way, this is better in surgery than in, say, office work now. Because in surgery, you still all have to show up in the same room.
Yeah.
And you at least get to interact with one another for hours. Yeah, at least currently. And so even though that junior person doesn't get to participate, and this does harm connection in that they can't earn the trust and respect of that senior surgeon by performing well and struggling and asking smart questions and so on, they at least do get to interact with that senior surgeon. But in knowledge work, especially post-pandemic, but certainly given all the AI that folks now use, everyone is much more self-serve and potentially isolated than they were before. It's sort of, I take my digital input, I transform it in some way, and I produce a digital output. And I work at the same organization, but how often do I go in? How often do I have accidental collegial interaction with people that might lead to us both feeling a bit vulnerable and connecting about, some issue in our personal lives, or I know it's your birthday and I'm going to bring you a little something like that kind of. And how often does an expert, more directly about skill, how often do they get to actually watch me work on something that matters to them and to a customer, client, colleague, whatever, and at the end say, that I would have done differently. And by the way, excellent on that, right? That kind of moment of observation that allows that expert to have the confidence to give that junior person another opportunity.
Yeah.
So if the novice is optional and distanced from the work, as a result of that expert seizing the new tool and driving ahead with it, then all three of those C's really can suffer. And I say can, but this is what the last 12 years of my work has shown across 30 contexts. Like I have one lovely shining exception of this by accident happening in the opposite direction. Everything going much better than it was before, actually. But it was unintentional, as far as I can tell. And we must do much better than that. Breaking this taken for granted learning process at the very moment that we're introducing economy, global society reconfiguring technology, like hurting human learning and skill development is the worst possible moment in history, because things are changing more rapidly than before for us to be weakening that process. We need the opposite, actually.
Yeah, and there's a lag effect, obviously, so that we won't feel the effects immediately, but when we do, it will be really bad.
Yeah, and of course, we don't have the data on that, and humans are just beautifully creative and resourceful under pressure, and so I don't make any firm prediction about that. But if you take the current trend and you extrapolate forward, it's a $1 trillion problem.
Yeah.
It's odd. It feels almost hubristic to say, but adaptation is the primary game we must all play these days, I think.
Yeah. So I guess the good news is, you said that it's not the technology itself, it's the way that we are implementing it, which I guess means that we have the option to do better. And you talk in the book about some rare examples of how people have kind of maybe bent or broken the rules slightly and managed to still develop these skills. So, what can we learn from those kinds of edge cases to help us actually leverage robotics and AI to make learning on the job more effective rather than less?
Right. The first edge cases I came across, I called shadow learners because, as you say, they bent and broke rules, sort of traditional expectations about how one ought to go about learning how to do X in order to build their skill, because those traditional methods were failing against this new technological constraint. And what they did not do, by and large, is turn technology into an ally in that skill pursuit. They did to some degrees, very limited ways. But they more just sort of found ways to circumvent the impediments, right? So that's an important set of lessons. And really what they were fighting to preserve was the skill code. So these shadow learners, whether that was in surgery or investment banking or what have you, law, policing, they would find ways to ensure challenge, complexity, and connection in their work one way or another. And all of the examples of their behavior would make everyone cringe at least a bit. I don't want this to come across as like, oh, they were rebels. They just did things no one quite ever thought of. And, oh, that's interesting and unconventional. No. The classic poster child of this is a guy named Joseph Lister, the inventor of antisepsis, the technique in medicine that saved millions of lives, millions. And yet he maimed and killed people and obscured data in order to invent this technique. And we call him the father of modern surgery. And I have surgeons who got very good at robotic surgery who operated on patients when the senior doc was not in the room.
Right.
Literally. That is what I observed. And so no one should want those techniques to be replicated, right? But if those people were willing to take risk, that much risk, even if it was just your professional status, over an extended period of time, because developing skill takes a long time, then we should at least pay attention and try to learn what is worth that risk. Like, what are you fighting to protect? So that's the skill code in the first part of the book. There's a much deeper and more, to me, exciting and positive play to be made here with technologists as allies, because I do have examples where technology was, in the case of a junior surgeon, in a very small way, they relied on YouTube videos, recorded videos of surgery, deeply, extensively, but in very interesting and novel ways that might be reflected in some early papers in the human-computer interaction literature and so on. Around video review, there's some great literature on that. And these folks were essentially rediscovering techniques for video review and learning. But this is not redesigning that, YouTube itself to drive people more towards learning. And there, I think there is this is the last chapter of the book, a universally sort of wide open and quite exciting territory of taking the very thing that's part of the insult right now and just reconfiguring it and delivering it in a way that makes for healthier challenge, complexity, and connection more broadly, more equitably, and in greater volume than could have been achieved before. I know it's a sort of a lofty vision, but now I have enough data to say it's certainly required that we try.
Yeah.
The status quo is not an option, but it seems almost in some cases very straightforward to achieve. So I wrote a post on my Substack in October of last year called "Don't Let AI Dumb You Down." Everything I'm focused on now is about generative AI, basically has been since around the time that ChatGPT hit our shores. And in the back quarter of that piece, I wrote up detailed custom instructions that anyone can dump into ChatGPT so that in each interaction, it nudges you towards healthier challenge, complexity, and connection. Okay. So I would say it was about 5 months ago, I was trying to write some Python code to predict when rockets were going to land back on Earth here at Vandenberg Space Force Base in the States. I'm in Santa Barbara, California. That's not far from where SpaceX lands its boosters. Okay. And so if you know when they're going to land them, you can go up and watch. It's, well, for my wife and I, it's really entertaining. It's awe-inspiring, actually. Yeah. So I began that task, and ChatGPT, after the first set of interactions, said, is there another human being or maybe a group nearby that share your interest? Might you connect with them to share tips? ChatGPT will not do that if it's not configured properly. Yeah. But it took me, well, now anyone can take that text and trivially dump it into their custom settings. It's annoying for ChatGPT to say, do you want to do this on your own a little bit before I do it for you? Or do you want to just do it? And I'm like, no, please just give me my answer. But sometimes I say, yes, I would like to I came to you. I'm going to walk away now. That is a trivial UX change. Utterly
Yeah.
trivial. It has nothing to do with the LLMs underneath. There's not a training run required. The first company that sells one of these large models that makes a surface interaction change in such a way that your average garden variety user is just nudged towards more valuable skill that they can take more pride in and create more value in the world through using, that company is going to become famous instantly. I mean, it's this sort of human augmentation story is one that everyone is rightly thirsty for. And so in some cases, changing the technology will take a lot more deep work than that. I don't mean to, sort of make this seem like a simple problem, but it does seem like a target-rich environment because we really haven't been trying.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we have an audience question from Hunter on Twitter, which is kind of related to what we've been talking about, but quite specific to one industry. So Hunter said, how can humans and intelligent machines collaborate to enhance advanced manufacturing capabilities, leveraging each other's strengths to drive innovation and growth?
Right. No one knows the answer to that question. I couldn't possibly. And yet that kind of question is going to drive, if it's pursued with vigor and creativity, is going to create the sort of new future option. I mean, I do have some familiarity with this territory. I have done some research in manufacturing and so on, but not research on how generative AI might be worked into manufacturing in a way that uplifts the workers involved, enriches their skill the longer they do the work. I have recently talked to a colleague, an endorser in the book, and now an investor in a company that I've just started, and he's much more familiar with manufacturing, and he is quick to say that it's a relatively straightforward change on the display and the user interaction for CNC milling machines, right? These multiple axis devices that are essentially robots in reverse. They are a self-contained, it's like a dishwasher. There's an object inside the box that gets transformed by the robot. No human can enter that space. And workers program these, enter programs, and then subtly modify programs when there's strange idiosyncrasies of the material that the engineer hadn't thought of. There are minor modifications you could make to the way that worker, their skilled workers interact with that piece of manufacturing equipment that in their slack time, for instance, might nudge them to say, hey, do you want to get back to that side project of yours? Or would you like to learn a little bit more about programming? Or what about the finances of this operation? You curious about that? Like the device itself could be a portal for them as a learning interaction. Or, hey, did you know that this person in the other facility for your organization is also kind of focused on this particular new technique or device end effector, but they've got 2 years of experience more than you. Would you like to connect with them? The device itself could do that. So this is just what Matt Beane can see. I'm very confident that at a systemic level, like for thinking about a manufacturing line and so on, or an entire operation, there are ways of doing this as well. So I think it's an astute question. I think the world basically has no concrete tested answer to it.
Yeah, fair enough. We have another audience question. This was submitted by Jake on Twitter and is a bit more all-encompassing. Jake says, will robots replace human workers or will they augment their skills?
Yeah, so typically I would just say yes and laugh because, of course, it's both. But I understand why people are seeing that as a binary question.
Yeah.
When I speak with people who ask it that way, typically what they're concerned about is the ratio of those two things.
Yeah.
Like how big a deal is job loss compared to enriching the humans that are remaining. And I think there's actually 3 categories to be concerned about, not 2. So the one is job loss. And of course, job losses occur with all new technological paradigms every single time. And for the people that are affected, they are typically those who have least privilege or less privilege than many. Yeah. And they are not well treated by society and not well prepared for that occurrence, and their economic outcomes and sort of welfare outcomes suffer after losing a job in that sense. And so that those things are tragic and need to be better managed. It's a ridiculous waste of human potential. And all of that is rounding error for the human species compared to all of us having to relearn 10 to 15% of our jobs, like 2.6 billion working adults right now must relearn. The best exposure studies now suggest, say, 10 to 15% of your job. If the technology stopped right here, you would have to relearn how to do them.
Yeah.
And so that means we have a reskilling problem that is several orders of magnitude more serious, more pervasive, and is invisible to decision makers. So that one is the one that got me worried enough to write a book.
Yeah.
The job loss thing, other people are focused in that area. In fact, I think probably some amount of job loss is healthy for the human species. If we're going to make progress, it would be a sign, in fact, that our species was unwell if we had too little. I don't know what too little is, but anyway, so the augmentation question is the third question. Like, what could we be doing that is far better than we could ever achieve before because of this new technology in a way that uplifted the humans involved, welfare and capability both improved, economic outcomes and so on, as well as organizational performance. There's a trap inside that one, which has to do with sort of just trying to do previous things better with new tools, which is natural. That's what humanity does as well. It's just pretty wasteful compared to, what is the internet for? It took us a couple decades at best to figure out, it's good for things we couldn't have imagined.
Yeah.
So anyway, the answer, will we be augmented or will we lose jobs? Of course, it's both. The job losses will probably come before. Jake, you are not going to see your augmentation before the job losses, roughly speaking. There will be pockets of this augmentation happening early, but they won't be understood by the bulk of us early enough for us all to be satisfied. This is what I try to do in my research. I try to go find people who are doing new inventive things selectively, scientifically, so that we can understand them sooner. But if society functions the way that it has in the past with new technological paradigms, that comes later. The job losses come earlier. And everyone silently reskills. Yeah. And that's the giant cost that, and it's not just monetary, it's stress. And just learning itself is hard, especially as the world's increasingly digital and distanced and so on. Certain things are easier. YouTube's there. But anyway, that's a long-winded response. Sorry, Jake, to your question. But I understand the concern about job losses, and I would encourage you to get concerned about reskilling instead.
Yeah, it was a very all-encompassing question, so not easy to answer in a succinct way. You're also CEO of Skillbench. So can you tell us a little bit about that company?
Yes, I can tell you a very little bit, and I will say, appreciate you asking. We don't have a website up yet. So we're quite stealthy, but that will all change, I would say, in about a month or two. Okay. But what I discovered, I didn't anticipate in the book. I knew a colleague and I, his name is Joo-Ho Kim, who's now my co-founder. He's at KAIST in Korea, which is sort of Korea's MIT. Okay. He and I both came from MIT. And for 3.5 years, we were working on a system to aid surgeons in using video in the way that my shadow learners did. But even better. So instead of doing it in isolation and doing a lot of video review, making it an overt, interactive journey between expert and novice. So the expert would give an assignment to review video, and the junior person would submit that back. And if they got a good grade, so to speak, they got to operate more. And that was all looking magnificent. And then in April, I went to Wharton School at UPenn to give a talk at their Future of Work and AI conference. And one of the key advisors for our company is Ethan Mollick. And he said, "Oh, good for you. You're going for medicine. That's brilliant. If you really want to do it, I've got your back all the way. What you're building, if you look at it another way, could serve organizations writ broad in a much more dramatically valuable way." He gave me a quick 2 seconds on what he thought was possible there. And within 24 hours, Joo-Ho and I had decided to pivot the company. So now the interesting bit is that the technical core of what we were doing with video is now relevant to helping firms see the work in their firm very precisely in ways that they couldn't before, at reasonable cost, and then help them understand where people are liable to give tasks away to AI and what the side effects of doing so would be, so that they can understand, well, for these many little subtasks they have to handle, actually, it's these 5 where they get the most skill benefit in doing them.
Yeah.
For instance, the novice benefits or they benefit or what have you. And out of those 5, they're tempted to give away these 2 to AI. And so by policy, we're going to say, no, I know it's annoying, but you must continue to do this for skill development. However, these other 11, please feel free. Go ahead. Use AI. It's magnificent. So it's a much more sort of, our intent is to give a new digital, reasonable cost yardstick or meter stick in deference to the rest of the world, a new metric to analyze their key business processes and say, all right, so we can now be much more judicious and focused about getting productivity out of these new AI tools, but also there's a joint optimization to be done with that and workforce readiness or skill of the workers. And we can predict and show this for work processes. So it's early days. We're doing early sort of test deployments and demonstrations now for customers. I think probably in about a month or so, we'll have a website up.
Okay. Brilliant.
And, it will either die, as most startups do, or if we're successful, this is the critical challenge for me professionally to give this world this new metric so that firms can make much more conscious and intentional decisions about where and how to use any form of automation so that they understand the trade-off. Firms that are very good, they already intuitively understand, oh yeah, junior people are really struggling. They have that. But this will give them a vocabulary and a set of targets so that they don't have to sort of do an all or nothing approach to these tools.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, it sounds really exciting. I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's been fascinating chatting to you today, Matt. I thoroughly recommend that all the listeners check out your book, The Skill Code. I've been chatting to Matt Beane from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy Robot Talk, please share the podcast, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps boost the podcast, so thanks in advance. And don't forget to join the Robot Talk community on Patreon if you'd like to support the podcast and get access to some awesome perks, including behind-the-scenes updates and monthly bonus episodes. Visit patreon.com/Claire Asher to find out more. Next week, I'll be speaking to Ishin Chu from Cardiff Metropolitan University about humanoid robots. Until then, I've been Claire Asher, and this has been Robot Talk. Robot Talk is brought to you by the Hamlin Centre, Imperial College London.